And we are live. So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our November listening club. We listen to The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, which is the debut solo album of Lauryn Hill of the Fugees. And a little bit of housekeeping. I am going to keep it relatively short because I say this every single time. um, But this is one of three multimedia clubs. We also have a monthly movie club as well as a quarterly book club. We already had our movie club this past Monday, so that is up online for you guys to watch. And our quarterly book club will do that at the end of January, which is actually when we'll have our next movie and listening club because we skip December. It's just the end of the year is just too busy for everybody, and we don't need any more added stress, I guess. Um, that being said, I will announce the picks this coming Sunday. Um, so you'll have December and January to listen to the album or watch the movie or to finish the book, which is Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. Or Anne Lamott. I actually don't know. I just kind of assumed it was Lamott. I should look that up. I'll look that up before we have our book club so I can pronounce it properly.
It's Anne Lamott.
Lamott?
Yeah. She's from the Bay.
If you want to find out what our picks are or join us for any of our future calls, you can always find us over on our Facebook group at Dragonfly Arts. We don't just have these calls. We also have some other weekly calls, feedback calls, talks about what it's like to be a creative, as well as it just being a forum for creatives, by creatives, any of your issues that you would like to bring up and have discussed with a group of like-minded people, you can bring up there. And if you like what we do, everything that we offer is for free. But if you would like to support us, you can join our Patreon for as little as $2 a month. There aren't any perks. Everything we do is open to the public, but it does help us out. So if you like what we do and would like to support us, our Patreon is there. And just a note for anybody out there that's watching this week, I guess, we don't actually have a creatives call this Saturday.
Correct. Which would be tomorrow.
Yeah, I don't know. I forgot that it was Friday. I was like, clearly it's 2 days from now. So, but on that note, let's get into our discussion on The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. Was this your first time listening to this album?
I think all the way through, yes, it was, or at least in a very long time.
What about you, Miguel?
Yeah, like all the way through. Yeah. Gosh, yeah. I'm assuming I heard some of the songs individually before on their own, but I'm not sure.
I think the same for me. I think I listened to it all the way through because I had a series of like listening to an album every single day, and I'm pretty sure it was a part of it. But like you hit a point with that where you're just kind of listening to an album and it's not really critical thinking other than little bits and pieces that grab you, so it almost doesn't count. That being said, I do know quite a few of the songs on this album. Like as soon as they came on, I was like, oh, I know this song. Do you have a favorite that came to mind?
I like Lost Ones.
I always had trouble with this question. I like the chord. There was one section of doo-wop that had really cool chord changes, and that struck me. But it's hard to pick. I can't pick.
This album's very front-loaded for me. So I like a lot of the songs at the start of it, and I like them less as I go through the album.
I think I liked, oh gosh, which one was it? I Used to Love Him.
With Mary J. Blige?
Yep. I liked that one. This is, in all honesty, not my cup of tea. I've never heard Lauryn Hill before, so just not my style of music, really.
Yeah. Do you think that this counts as a concept album? I think that it counts as a concept album.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And when we've done concept albums before, depending on how you define that. But she has all that little interstitial stuff like they have that. Remember all those songs on the Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon? We're trying to decide, is that a song? Is this an interstitial? Does it matter? Right. And so that to me kind of, most people who are doing that, the whole album, it's a concept, whether they want to admit it or not. Some people just do it on, like a certain song or a certain transition. But if you're doing it on the whole album, that it's a concept.
Yeah, and the discussion topic in the class is like kind of related to what the song is about. So they go together.
Yeah, it's a concept album kind of talking about love and her miseducation of it. The ways that she has misinterpreted or been wrong about love. And I think it's also about Wyclef Jean. And also her current relationship when she was making this album with Bob Marley's son.
Yeah, that one, the one that did American football in Canada.
What
was his name?
And what is his first name?
Bob Marley had a lot of those.
Yeah.
Daughters.
Let's see.
Yeah, I loved the interstitials. Those are actually my favorite part.
Rohan Marley. So Rohan.
Rohan. There you go. So this is, I sort of echo what Beckett said of like this, I'm not a big hip hop guy. That kind of all happened when I was older. And it's also kind of not my culture. But this album, I was more fascinated by reading about its effect on the culture. And I think there's a lot of parallels to the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper, at least for me personally, is that, Sgt. Pepper is like a really influential album, even though if you look at it sort of coldly, it doesn't have the best Beatles songs on it. It's hardly anybody's favorite Beatles song is from this album, but there's no denying it was an event. It was a watershed in the culture. And I think this album did that for hip hop. And I'll just talk about 3 things that it did, which makes it like really important. But like, there's, it's kind of like listen to Sgt. Pepper. There's nothing wrong with these songs. None of these songs are my favorite. Right. And it doesn't really connect to me. And it doesn't mean it's not amazing, wonderful stuff. It's just like not for me. But like the first thing that it's easy to forget is that hip hop did not used to be mainstream. And this was kind of the first album that mainstreamed hip hop. Hip hop was selling a lot of records with certain artists, because Snoop Dogg happened before this, Tupac, all that stuff happened before this, but it wasn't mainstream as in mainstream in the culture. And this album basically sealed the deal with that. It also, and this is kind of like a related but important thing, is like the Grammys were sort of really slow to the party when it came to hip hop. And they finally started to fix that when I think she won 7 Grammys for this album, right? Which hip hop had not won Grammys to any notable extent before. So that's a reflection of the mainstream nature of the mainstreaming of hip hop. And then I think the other thing that she did is like people were singing and rapping on the same song before, but there was a lot of, it was resisted, right? Like some people thought that's not rap or that's not a song if you have rapping in it. And that resistance stopped after the mainstream success of this album. I kind of got the sense that people are still having that fight, but that's not like a primary issue anymore. And so I think just for those 3 reasons alone, there's not a lot more reasons why this is a really, really influential album. Just the fact that there was a female artist and it's not all sexualized. There's all kinds of stuff, but for those three things, I think it's like a really, really influential album. But when you like dive into it, there's like, you know, the songs are fine. There's nothing wrong with them. It's just not for me. I was much more into, you know, in terms of female, well, I guess Jill Scott stuff with the Roots was always just Jill Scott singing. I could be mistaken about that. Of her contemporaries, I really like D'Angelo's Vanguard album because of what they did with rhythm and taking it back to West Africa. So anyway, I just think this is on the level of Sgt. Pepper, an influential album that changed music. So I'll stop.
I think she also kind of clawed her way out from like the rubble with this album. So it's kind of a comeback story in a way because she was a part of the Fugees and they broke up before this, and like Wyclef Jean went on to being a big deal and regularly talked bad about her. And so this is her debut album after that, after being like front and center of the Fugees and kind of just getting ousted from it and trying to make a comeback after that. And I think that I also, this isn't my genre. I don't have a lot of back knowledge, a lot of history knowledge on it, which it feels like I should have had for this because lyrically it's very personal to her and it makes a lot of references to things that I just do not understand.
Yeah.
But I do know that like especially like Lost Ones and X Factor are specifically about Wyclef Jean and the breakup of the Fugees and how she was dealing with that. And this entire album, it's like switches between like being a breakup album and then also like showing that she's currently like happy with her romantic and like the love life. It's like it's both of them at the same time, but that lost love thing comes from her losing her band. But
Yeah.
I think that it also is one, the Fugees themselves also have that kind of prevalence in hip hop history of they are a big name, very, very influential. So I think her being able to, claw herself out of the rubble that was left behind there and make it on her own while also refusing help from the people that initially shunned her for the Fugees. Because I guess like
Yeah, Wyclef wanted to produce this.
yeah, and she said
He
no,
wasn't
but
dissing her until she told him he couldn't produce the album.
she wanted to separate herself.
Yeah, I didn't think about it in that way. Like we're so used to like because you make a really good point, Miguel, because we're so used to now rap and like melodic singing being in the same song, but we take that for granted because I don't have a lot of like back knowledge on the history of hip hop or anything, so I don't have that context to compare it to. But that's a really good point.
Yeah, and people were talking about it since the beginning because some of the earliest rap stuff was just rap, right? And sometimes it didn't even have a hook. It was just sort of like sort of this flow of words, and people were trying to do it, but there was a real tension there that I think this kind of took care of that. It's sort of like if you want to do it, awesome. If not, awesome. But there was less sort of that's not hip hop kind of stuff.
When did this album come out?
It was come out? Ooh, was it 98 or 99?
So this album was released in 1998. It was recorded from 1997 to 1998.
And I just want to point out, look at the last studio on there is Tough Gong in Kingston. That's Bob Marley's friggin' studio. That is just awesome.
I mean, it would make sense, Rohan
makes-
Marley. Yeah.
Total set. I think they spent a lot of time there compared to the other places. Because I think with the other places, she's kind of bouncing around a lot, wasn't she? But yeah, that's just like, I would listen to this album just by looking at what studio they recorded. I was like, Tough Gone, what the heck? Okay, we're listening. And then, also, God, this is going to be really geeky. I really like that some of the samples sounded like early reggae like 60s reggae before Bob Marley's influence, and I just love that. I had a box set of this album record label called Trojan that did a lot of early reggae stuff, and a lot of the samples, whether they were taken from that era or made to sound like that era, I just love the samples. It's like I could have just listened to the samples in the drum beat and just been perfectly happy.
Hip
But
hop, reggae, and R&B.
what's that?
The hip hop, reggae, and R&B, right, are the or at least the three types of music cited that when I was doing some background reading on it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I don't recall hearing, and I know people sample from all over the place, and I'm certainly not a hip hop expert, but people were mostly sampling from American R&B, right? And the fact that they're sampling or trying to make it sound like because early Trojan stuff was sort of like, well, it was all in, as far as I know, it was all in Jamaica, and Jamaica didn't have a tremendous amount of technology, and so the records just had this vibe, right? And some of those samples, I'm like sitting there going, I got to find that Trojan box set because I want to find where that sample came from. It's just got really cool sound. That was really geeky. I'll stop.
No, her samples are from all over the place. I had to like pull up the listing that they have for like the samples, and it's like The Doors, Wu-Tang Clan, and Toots and the Maytals. Like,
Toots, definitely, yeah.
yeah, Jose Feliciano.
Oh, oh, is that on the Carlos Santana tune? I wonder.
Yeah, To Zion. Yeah.
Wow, that's
So,
fun. Sorry.
That's your son,
influences.
right?
Yes. Yeah, To Zion is about her son.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what got me while listening to this is the beats stay fairly similar throughout the entire. There's very little change in the backing track, and so as a result, she has to like push and pull her lyrics. And like I can feel it like when she's singing lines and the way that she does her melodic structure, like that's the only thing that's really changing, and it really like pushes and pulls the beat in different directions, and I thought that was really, really interesting.
Yeah, I think that's kind of why it all kind of ran together for me, is because the beat is the same and there wasn't enough differentiation in like the melodies or anything to like really pull anything out from it. Like there are no like memorable choruses or anything that that stuck out to me. So
there's a lot of times while listening to this album where I was like, ooh, that's really cool, and then immediately forgot.
Yeah.
But I think that's why, is because it's not a sound bite. It's her singing over a beat. It has a very interesting melody line to it, but it's not consistent. It's not a riff. It's not.
Yeah. For me, whenever I'm listening to like rap or R&B or hip hop or anything like that, I focus on the lyrics a lot. And I think there were a lot of interesting lyrical like things that she did, but I couldn't tell you any of them.
I'm taking hip hop, my first hip hop class ever, for the first time at Santa Monica College, and I was thinking Lost Ones would be a good one to, I don't know, learn with, because of the beats. The beat on that one struck me as very steady, and it also, in a way, it also kind of grabbed me. I don't know.
I know nothing of hip hop dance.
Me neither.
It has a very long personnel list, which I think I made this slide just to show you how long the personnel list is for this.
Oh, wow.
Oh, I learned, you guys might all know this, but I learned something cool. Like John Legend is on this album, but he hadn't changed his name to Legend yet.
Yeah, I learned that earlier today when I was like going through the songs individually. It was like one of the fun facts.
He must have been 12 or at least really young. I think, what was his last name? I mean, his first name is Steven. Yeah.
Yeah, he played on, Everything is Everything.
Oh, that's the ballad, or is it Nothing Even Matters is the ballad?
Nothing
What is the
Even
one that's
Matters
the
is the
straight song with
ballad.
no rap?
Um, I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was asking which is the song that's just a straight ballad without the rap? Is that Nothing Even Matters or
I
Everything
think
Is
that's
Everything?
Nothing Even Matters.
Oh, the D'Angelo one. Yeah.
Yeah. She wanted to make a song that sounded like D'Angelo. No, was it Everything is Everything? Kind of felt like it came out of, like, I got a jump scare
Hmm.
in this album.
Meaning, what does that mean?
So going from Nothing Even Matters into Everything is Everything is a musical jump scare.
Ooh, what does that
It's
mean?
like this slow ballad, and then Everything is Everything starts with just like this horn. So you have like this slow like fade out on I thought about this because I listened to the album earlier today. But it's like this really slow like fade out and then just bam!
Oh, okay, an abrupt transition.
It was an abrupt transition.
There you
And
go.
but the thing is, there's not a lot of abrupt transitions. Like a lot of these songs fade out, but they don't like abruptly start because like between some of them there is that interlude that's like bringing them together. But
Hmm.
for that specific transition, I was sitting on my couch and I literally went like I
Yeah,
just
I
thought that was
remember.
funny and wanted to share it with you.
I do remember a transition that kind of felt like that, and I don't remember if it was that or if it was in the beginning. Because I also listened to this earlier today.
Yeah. The funny thing is, the first time I listened to the album was like all the way through was earlier on in the month, but I had it on in the background while I was doing other things, and I did not recall getting jump scared. But listening to it with just headphones on
Oh, you're
while
doing
reading the
headphones.
lyrics was a little bit much. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's why I was doing other things, so it didn't jar me as much. But I did notice that is at least one point that I was like, "Oh, that was abrupt."
Yeah, it was rough for me. Um, yeah, I don't actually have I know that there's a lot of history behind this album. I honestly came onto this call hoping that somebody else would have more of it. Um, because yeah, this isn't my world. I wanted to listen to it because we did talk about not having a lot of R&B listening, and also we were talking about like female musicians, and this kind of just like hit the nail on the head for a lot of them. Um, incredibly influential, like influenced, I would say most if not all modern R&B artists, as well as like a
Yeah.
lot of people outside of it.
Well, yeah, and then all of Beyonce makes sense, and even an album we did recently, the Pimp a Butterfly album,
Yeah.
is kind of like building on this, right? And he's doing different things, and it's very different because he sort of jumps around a heck of a lot more in terms of genres or music styles or what have you. You know, it's less of a concept, even though it is. I think it's at least loosely a concept album, but you know, somebody like the Beyonce couldn't have had the career she had after this without this mainstreaming that hip hop element. She would have had to decide to be. She wanted mainstream. She would have had to have been like straight R&B, straight singing, right? And the fact that she's got these. Well, I'm not hugely familiar with her stuff, but the stuff I've heard has like serious hip hop influence, and that this album gave her that permission, right, where she could do that in mainstream. And I can't remember if her early band predated this album. What was the girl group she was in before she was Beyonce?
Destiny's Child.
Yeah, that predates this, right?
I don't know.
I
I
think
think
that
it
was mid
must.
90s, mid
I think
90s.
it, yeah, I
Yeah.
think it must have been during. So
So my point is, let's say it was the mid '90s. If she wanted to be Beyonce, the solo artist, she couldn't have had mainstream success with rap, with significant heavy rap elements in her music like there is. She would have had to just sort of stick to singing and R&B, right? And so that there's influence with Beyonce, there's influence with Kendrick Lamar, and those are two of the biggest artists out there. The other thing that's really interesting is like I read somewhere that this was her first and last solo album. Like she didn't do a solo album after this. Is that correct? It was the
she
internet.
did not. She did not do a solo album again after this. She has an MTV Unplugged, actually, which when I posted this, somebody in the group said that they think that the MTV Unplugged is one of the best ones, and I meant to check it out, and I just never did.
Is it from the tour for this album?
It's from 2002, so it's not.
Was that
I think it's
MTV
more. I think it's more folk and soul oriented than it is like R&B and hip hop.
Oh.
I imagine it's probably more in line with like the "Can't Take My Eyes Off of You" track that she has on this. Like I said, I've never.
I liked that rendition of that song.
Me too.
I sorry.
Go ahead, Beckett. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I definitely heard a lot of what would become, kind of R&B and hip hop that we know now, and some of the influence that other artists that are more popular now took from this. It kind of feels like a building block. And so listening to it, I was very like, I don't know, I was reminding me of other current artists, but I didn't. So it's a little hard to place era wise in that way. That's why I wasn't sure when it was released.
Yeah.
Well, it kind of is timeless in that way, or at least relatively timeless. You don't listen to it and go, "Oh, this is '90s rap."
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, it sounds much more current.
Yeah.
I was going to say, in regard to the MTV Unplugged, it shares no tracks with this. It is entirely new tracks. All of them are written by her. So it's essentially an entirely different album.
It is. What?
Yeah.
So what? So if she didn't do a solo album, where are the songs from? She only released those songs on MTV Unplugged?
It seems so.
That is crazy.
Interesting.
Wow.
Yeah,
Well,
I haven't done a lot of reading on it, so I don't actually know a lot about this, but I do know that it is entirely different album, entirely different soundscape, honestly. And she performed them alone with an acoustic guitar.
So I wonder what shift happened, that she didn't really pursue this style of
well, didn't she have 6 kids?
I think that there was also
There's
like
12
I
years
said,
of her life right there.
This is also a breakup album. And the breakup's done. So when you move on to like other things, you're not going to just write another breakup album again.
Yeah, but I mean, just kind of like in this style or genre.
And you got to imagine
it's a little odd for an artist to just like put out one album of one style and never touch it again.
Absolutely. And it sold the time. I mean, artists have done that, but those are people who like didn't have careers and didn't sell.
Right.
She sold a ton. The record label had to have been screaming for like, Miseducation Part 2.
Yeah.
As record labels do. And so that would have taken a lot of, it takes a lot to resist that.
Yeah, when I'm saying that, it's not like one hit wonders that I'm thinking like, successful musicians who have been critically acclaimed, won awards, and gone on to have successful careers. Like, it's a little odd for them to put out just like one album in one genre and then just Okay, I'm done.
We're done. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, she's not alone in that. I kind of view her as an artist that does a lot of work with other artists, and this was her debut solo,
Mm.
and then kind of a continuation of it after that. But I don't think she ever really felt the need to be a solo artist. I think she just made a solo work of art.
Mm.
Because I think of Lauryn Hill in context of other people a lot, either like influencing or she's featured on things. She contributes a lot of things to other artists doing things as like as an artist. So I think the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill is like, yeah, the solo work of an artist that usually does something different.
So there is, you're making me think of an analog. So you guys may not know this band, but there's this 80s band from England, which was the Smiths. They were sort of the English version of REM, but their May Gale lead singer was very flamboyant. And anyway, they broke up really quickly. And then the main music person in that band was the guitarist Johnny Marr. And what he did between the mid 80s and the last 10 years was he was a serial band joiner, right? So he did electronic, which is a band from, I think one of the guys from New Order and one of the guys from, I want to say Erasure. I could have the name wrong. You know, in the 2000s, he joined, oh my God, another big band that is, I'm so bad with names. They were from Portland. It'll come back to me. But he sort of spent between the mid 80s and the 10 years ago. So let's say 2010, just kind of joining a bunch of bands, and it's never his band. Now in 2010, he did start his own solo career, but that was like 30 years of him just like, you know, sort of, he was writing, he was very, very active, but it was never his band, right? Generally never his band. But he had within that, he had a relatively high profile. I can't speak to how high her profile is, but he's very fulfilled doing that, right? And a lot of people bemoan the fact that the Smiths, you know, they were really bummed when the Smiths broke up, but he said that, you know, that was a band that was always destined to break up because the lead singer Morrissey was going to become a solo artist, and I was going to become this guy that bounced from band to band because that's what I like, is just being a serial joiner of bands. And so she might be a serial, how do you say, like,
Contributor.
She's a
contributor.
serial featured artist.
Yeah, and I'm assuming she's co-writing when she does that. Is that a good assumption, fair assumption, or no?
I think that's a fair assumption, especially for the kind of work that she does. I think that's a fair assumption.
So that's
I definitely
way,
think she exists in the background for a lot of musicians.
yeah, and I think that's one way to have a career and a family at the same time, because you don't have to commit to big projects, you don't have to tour, and you're still scratching the itch. And, you know, everybody would love her to do another solo album, right? But, you know, it's okay if people want to check out and just kind of do that. It's not like she's gone. And there also might be the fact that the first album she did sold a ton, was a huge influence on the culture, and she's never going to do that again. I mean, she might sell a ton, but, you know, nobody, you know, the Beatles didn't have 2 Sgt. Peppers, they had 1, right? And so that might be just too much to deal with emotionally. Like, I'm going to do an album and they're going to want it to sell like Miseducation. They're going to want it to influence the culture like Miseducation, and it can't. It just ain't going to happen. And a lot of the best artists, you know, do a different thing every album. The Beatles were the chief among them. They didn't do Sgt. Pepper, you know, 2. They did Magical Mystery Tour, right? And so this may be her way of doing that, of keeping things fresh and always trying new things. But I don't know. We need to recruit a hip hop expert to our group. So that
I know we've tried doing this a few times, and every single time we're like, "Well, we listened to it."
Yeah, I wish I knew more about the history there.
And
Well,
it
I
is
mean,
like it's such a very specific history as well.
What'd you say, Sam?
Yeah, like I said, I'm just learning too. So wish I could be more helpful than I am.
All good.
yeah, but that's good too because we're exposing ourselves to, our stuff and the people watching
Yeah.
maybe in the same boat.
Well,
And
and like I've said before, like a lot of the pieces of work that we've discussed in these various talks, whether it's book club, movie club, or this, I would never have listened to if it weren't for Rebecca. So
yeah, there you go.
broadening our horizons.
Which is the ultimate goal that I have with these clubs is I think it is very important as artists to broaden your horizons. It's very easy to get stuck in like your own little world.
Yeah.
So I was actively trying to get everybody out of their own little world. So I've succeeded in that regard, but I do wish that I had more knowledge on the subject or the time to find the knowledge.
Did this album come out before the D'Angelo
The
the
one
big
that she's featured on, I think they were recording it at the same time.
I want to call that Vanguard. It's not called Vanguard. It's the one before that. Voodoo. Did this come out before Voodoo? I can look it up.
I can also find out for you. I actually just closed my Wikipedia page on her.
I'll do it.
But I know that he was recording an album at the same time and they traded featurings on their albums.
Yeah, his was after 2000. January 2000. And then just so there I've never like thought of it as voodoo being influenced by this, but I can't imagine it's not. He was doing a lot to reinvent himself at the time of Voodoo, right? And that album, he was probably started when this came out. He was working on that album for years.
Yeah,
right?
he specifically was working on that album when she asked him to work on the song with him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that is the
makes
only
total
information
sense.
that I have for that. So he was definitely working on the album at the same time.
And then that album is it's really groundbreaking in its own way, but it didn't change music to the level that this album did. And what I think happened is he did some really interesting and groundbreaking things in terms of rhythm and moving away from what drum machines typically did. And I have to believe he was empowered by not only working with her, but the success that she had with what she did. Right. So just like, there's no Pimp a Butterfly without, Miseducation. I don't think there's Voodoo without Miseducation, although they're pretty close together.
I think that's a fair statement.
Yeah. But yeah. Anyway.
I mean, even the title of it is kind of interesting because the title of it has been referenced many, many times, but it itself is a reference.
Yeah, it's to a book, right? It's Miseducation of Slaves or something like that.
Yeah.
And they were going to call it the Education, and then that didn't feel right, and then they found another book title to appropriate.
Yeah.
And it was a Miseducation of.
Yeah, it was it was inspired by the education of Sonny Carson and then was rechanged to Miseducation after the Miseducation of the Negro, which is a reference to Carter G. Woodson's 1933 novel.
Back when you can name your book with the word Negro. Not something that would happen today.
I mean, it's a thesis as well.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah.
Wait, it's a paper or it's a book?
It's a book, but it's a nonfiction thesis book. I assume that would mean it's a kind of philosophy in a way. I don't know a lot about it. That is the information I have.
It's a great title, whatever it is, right?
Yeah, Carter G. Woodson was an American historian, author, journalist, and the founder of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History.
There you go.
I've heard of him. I don't
Really?
know if I read any of his work in school, though, but I have heard his name.
I've never heard his name before, so I am sorely uneducated. But yeah, so that was, and then it's so interesting that it is like entirely based on this book from 1933, and yet everything else after that was based on this album. This
All
took
artists
over
wrote-
as like the main point that people are referencing.
Hey, I had a hypothesis to test if we have time.
I don't
about-
have anything else to add, so I'm
Well, and this kind of goes back to when I was making comparisons to Sgt. Pepper and this album. And that is, if you're making a concept album, if that's your main thing, and that was definitely the Beatles' main thing, although they kind of abandoned it after the first two segues, but it was supposed to be this concept album, and it was supposed to be released not as a Beatles album. It was supposed to be released as this fictitious band, Sgt. Pepper. But in the effort to make something a contiguous whole, to make it a concept, I'm wondering if then you don't worry so much, or you're not so concerned that you have these amazing songs, that you're more thinking about, if not a narrative, you're more thinking about the concept and how a different song can relate to the concept. And, oh, hey, this particular subject area hasn't been covered. Let's put something in there. And I can't say that either Lauryn Hill or the Beatles were doing that, but I go back to that Beatles album. That album is an amazing album, but I don't think it's even a top 3 or 5 Beatles album, just in terms of the pure songwriting. Like I say, Nobody I Know, one of their favorite songs is on Sgt. Pepper, right? But it was still hugely influential. And I wonder if that's why it was influential, because it was a concept, even though it's a much looser concept album than this album is. And that's the power of it. And it doesn't have to have all these sort of like landmark, this is the big single, and these are all these great songs. So even like, and I'm much more familiar with Sgt. Pepper than this, and I apologize, but like the biggest song from Sgt. Pepper is Day in the Life. And that's not a good song. Nobody ever covers it. It's 2 song fragments and the orchestral swell of doom. It's more of an event than a song, you know? And so, and this is a bigger artistic question. So when you're having this concept thing in your head, you know, me being a song guy, I'm looking for the songs. Where's the best songs? Where's the best songs? And maybe that's a fool's errand when it comes to things like, you know, Sgt. Pepper, when it comes to things like Dark Side of the Moon, when it comes to things like Pimp a Butterfly, or most especially Miseducation. I'll shut up. Discuss.
No, I think that was a completely fair statement. I genuinely enjoy listening to concept albums. I think more than I enjoy listening to albums full of songs by an artist that I like. It's like a whole journey to go on. It's like watching a movie in a way. So I've always really liked concept albums, and I've kind of mourned the loss of the concept album because that's not really a thing that exists. But I'm glad that you brought up To Pimp a Butterfly, because I kept thinking about that album and how he wrote that entire album and then went on a trip and was like, nope, this album is going to be about this trip, and scrapped all of his songs so that all of the songs for To Pimp a Butterfly could be about his trip. And I think that is like, I think you can write a really great song and be like, this doesn't fit for this album. And I'm sure that's happened many times, where it gets put on a shelf somewhere for a possible future album if it doesn't serve the concept. But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, Dark Side of the Moon as well. Like, where do the songs start? Where do they end? It's great. I enjoyed listening to it, but
And
I
there are
don't know. I can't really sing you any songs.
Yeah, and there are some good songs on there, but when you go to your favorite Pink Floyd songs, it's going to be stuff from The Wall, it's
Yeah.
that there's, I don't know. But that's an interesting thing, because if you're a songwriter and you're making a thing that's bigger than a song, you almost have to let the song go and serve the concept as opposed to this particular tiny bit. And how can we take that beyond music? I mean, where else does that happen? I don't know,
I think,
opera.
yeah, I think that this album would be a lot weaker without the interludes. Because I think that the interludes are the strand that's holding everything together, and without them, it's just a bunch of beads on the floor.
Which is very cinematic in a way, right?
Yeah.
Or at least, documentarian, right? And yeah.
Yeah,
And
I
so,
almost wanted to like get into that classroom and like observe the class discussion that was going on. Like I was so
Interestingly, all like she just asked, what's his name? He's a very famous poet who's doing this, but she just said, go up and talk to these kids about love, and it was all ad lib from there.
wow. Yeah. I mean,
oh, it's all in
it
one
sounds
session?
I
improvised.
think so. Yeah. But like there was the topic was just love, and then they had to piece it together from that.
It
That's awesome.
sounded like a lesson that like some, literature teacher or someone was giving a bunch of school their class, So definitely sounded authentic and not scripted whatsoever.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But where else do people do concepts like this, where it's not, 10 pieces of art? It's a concept where the multiple pieces of art are a bigger thing.
It's a good question.
Does it happen in I once saw a Picasso exhibit in Paris. There's actually a Picasso museum in Paris that I stumbled upon because I got lost trying to find the Modern Art Museum. And the concept was Carmen. And apparently he had come back, not to the opera Carmen, but to the folktale Carmen multiple times over his career. And you got to see how things evolved. And then with that, I started looking for other evolution, and I found 3 different studies of guitar at that same museum, where it's like, here's a relatively straightforward photorealistic painting of a guitar, and then here it's sort of like starting to melt apart, and then here it's complete abstraction. And I don't know.
Yeah, Picasso did a lot of various studies in different styles of the same object. He did that a lot.
Yeah. And certainly operatic composers have to move the narrative along, or like somebody like Stephen Sondheim, I'm sure he's got, his best stuff. There's going to be some songs that are moving the narrative along, as opposed to this is an amazing, great song that Frank Sinatra is going to cover. Right. So
Right.
Definitely opera, musical theater. I was just trying to get it past music.
Yeah, I don't know. Like something that's a part of a greater whole. I can't really think of anything.
I think it's almost like a very long-term like TV show. Like is the biggest comparison that I can have is all these little tiny pieces that have to serve the whole of the story.
Or I
There's
guess
too many
like
TV shows that don't do that.
the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
It's a very hard skill, and I think that you see it more often in music because of things like opera, where you have to have themes that go through the entire thing. It's more built into the culture of it. But it absolutely is something that should exist for any sort of long-term project.
Yeah.
I think TV shows is the most likely one because it is a bunch of tiny pieces that come together to form a whole.
I know Shakespeare did that a lot. Like he referenced his other plays in plays all the time. So it's like to get everything, you had to have knowledge of all the other plays to really understand what was being said.
A level 4 meme.
A what?
A level 4 meme.
Uh-oh. You're making
Fourth
me feel
dimensional
old.
meme?
No, so it's a thing that occasionally I'll come across online where I don't understand it, and that's what Ryan's like, oh man, this is a level 4 meme, where you have to understand like three
Oh,
different other memes in order
Yeah.
to understand this one meme. Like you have to have the history lesson of everything
Yeah.
leading up to it in
Memes
order to,
based upon memes upon memes upon memes.
yeah,
Yeah.
you like have to know who PopCat is in order to understand this weird thing that's happening over here. It's yeah. Anyways, that's what it reminded me of.
well, you know, that's interesting.
But I'm thinking of it more in terms of like something that you almost are leaving breadcrumbs for like a bigger thing, but the bigger thing has to be the main thing, as opposed to like
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah.
yeah, as opposed to like referencing other things. So the only thing that I could come up with for that in this time frame is like, yeah, like a TV series or a series of any kind. Um, I'm sure that there are a bunch of like art collections that could also do that, where it's
There is a online theory that every Pixar movie exists in the same universe on the same plane, just at like different times apart from each other.
yeah, let me tell you about the Cars universe. Anyways,
Oh, but you know what? There have been, so Pete Townsend with The Who did a lot of concept albums, and one of them, you know, he did Tommy and he did Quadrophenia, and then he had one that sort of fell apart. And I can't remember why it fell apart, but it became one of their best albums, which is called Who's Next. But I think the concept was like he was imagining the internet in 1971. And but that whole concept fell apart, and so they said, "Screw it, we're just going to go do a regular album." And it's one of their, I think, their best albums because they stopped worrying about the concept and they just, you know, threw together a bunch of really, really good songs, you know. And it's also interesting. So I just say that because it's interesting when it falls apart. You have these like real grandiose ideas, and it ain't working, and it's like, okay. So it's going to have to become this other thing. It no longer. And he recently re-released the box set of, I don't know if it's a Who's Next box set or Ice House box set, and he turned the narrative into a graphic novel. So it's like this incredible box set with he rescued from his concept album that never happened this graphic novel, and it's like, and that only came out in the last, I want to say 3 to 5 years. And Who's Next came out early 70s, 72, before Quadrophenia, after Tommy, somewhere in there. Anyway, so there's an example of, we have an album, the record label is clamoring for an album, we got to give him something, this fell apart, and then he comes back to it like 50 years later, which I think is pretty cool. Anyway.
yeah, we got a little bit off topic there, but I liked where it went. And I'm going to spend a really long time trying to look for other examples outside of music of just like this concept album in the same way, just so that I can have the references in my back pocket for a future discussion.
Yeah,
But that
I'm
being
thinking
said,
go ahead.
I was going to say we're coming up on an hour, so I wanted
Yeah.
to make sure that if anybody had any other thoughts that they wanted to share on the album.
The only thought I have is not on the album, but there's this artist that travels all over the world and creates large-scale installations of trolls in like wilderness areas. And so that's like the only kind of thing that I could compare like having a concept like that to. Like it's like he's creating this world in which these trolls exist, and if you know where to look, you can kind of like happen upon them. They're really cool sculptures.
Yeah, are you guys
You
familiar
remember
with
the
Christo?
monoliths?
The monoliths.
Yeah, when the monoliths just started appearing places. That was like during the pandemic. But it was like the same thing of like there was an artist going out just like putting monoliths in places and people would discover them.
Yeah. Are you guys old enough to remember an artist named Christo? He did these enormous outdoor installations, like they could be miles long.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. Studied
Yeah,
them.
that would be interesting. The other thing I was going to say about this album is, could this be an opera? And I think it absolutely could, or at least some sort of musical theater piece. I mean, how many albums do you just look at that and go, that's an opera in a minute? Right? It's just like, duh. I mean, I think you could also say that about Pimp a Butterfly. You could say that about other albums, but anyway.
I do have a out. It's not about this album, but another hip hop album that I know really well and may be worth listening to for next time we do this. Donuts by Jay Dilla. Have you heard of that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I only know that Questlove speaks super highly of him. I'm not familiar with his work, but it's called Donuts.
Yeah, Donuts by Jay Dilla, late Jay Dilla.
Mm-hmm. What year was that?
2006, I think.
Cool.
I'll have to add it to the list.
Yeah,
But
we want to do more hip hop.
yeah, we definitely do. I need to improve my knowledge of it.
Game.
I do have an idea for our December, January that I need to finish fleshing out before we announce it. But if nobody has anything else to add about Miss Lauryn Hill, then I think I'm going to end the stream for the evening.
So it's
Sounds
good
good.
to listen
Thanks,
to.
Rebecca.
Yeah.
Well, thank
Oh,
you
by
guys
the
for
way,
joining me.
that album cover is a riff on Alice Cooper's School's Out album cover. There you go. You're fully geeked. But it's also that kind of.
Is that my sign off for all of these? You've been geeked. That sounds bad. Don't say that.
Oh, well, I mean, yeah, you're right. I just was riffing, and I take that back. That's just a really geeky thing for me to say, that to make the connection between this album cover and an Alice Cooper album cover. But it's the same thing. It was a wooden
Right.
school desk like this. And I'm gonna stop.
I just noticed that's what it is.
Yeah, see?
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining me, and I hope to catch you on the next one.
Yay. Thank you.
Bye.